welcome to you all. Good morning, good day, good evening, wherever you are in this international global webinar. My name is Martin Tauber, and I'm the European representative of the International Magnesium Association. And we are offering today a free webinar about a very recent and a very relevant topic in our industry. And we'll give you an update of the China primary magnesium industry, trying to provide some reasoning why we had or still have a supply shortage, why prices are going up or went up, and why also what in our view the outlook, short-term outlook for the next half year or the next year will be. The next slide, please. A short introduction to the International Magnesium Association. Most of you will know, of course. The IMA is a relatively old organization. It's founded already in 1943 in the US, and the main purpose remained to promote the use and market magnesium in all its relevant applications on a global base. And the IMA member ranges and the IMA platform is open to the complete magnesium value chain from primary producers to secondary producers, recyclers, OEMs, tier 1, tier 2 companies, equipment manufacturers, institutes, universities, and to individuals as well. We're offering a comprehensive network on a global base with our flagship conference, yearly conference, and I will come to an announcement a little bit later on. And we are providing a couple of stakeholder information on a regular base. And for those who don't know our website yet, it will be displayed at the end of the seminar. And if you have any questions, you can contact us, and we are happy to help you if you're interested in becoming a member, or if you are already a member and have some questions to us, please reach out to us. Next slide, please. A couple of highlights from us for this topic. We have established last year a sustainability committee where we are going to track primary projects in progress, also look into what's happening in China, and also look for some common messages for the magnesium industry. You know that most of the other industries have formulated their vision statements for becoming a low carbon industry within the next couple of years, with an end target of carbon free, mostly 2050, or like the Chinese 2060. And this committee will work for that and push for some vision statements and some way forward for our industry. We are offering members quite a comprehensive updates on market updates since last year, weekly or bi-weekly, on what's happening in China, and also this primary tracking report. Recent developments in Europe, so the supply crisis have resulted into attention of the European Commission, and since beginning of this year, we are part of an action, an ad hoc group on the European level to look for and re-establishing primary magnesium production again, with a target of 15% of the European needs. So this is currently going on. Some events where you can reach us or can talk to us will be in the US and in the TMS. Will be an India event on reaching out to to increase metal magnesium interest in India. It's an online event open to the public. We have a talk on the SRE. We'll be in Europe on the LightCon, Eurogus, Norcast, and the Sustainable Industrial Manufacturing event in Brussels. And also we're gonna have an in-person conference this year again at the end of August in Barcelona, and you're all welcome to join us there. I also want to thank on this occasion other associations or people who have promoted this webinar today. This is Industrial Aluminium and the Critical Raw Material Alliance have also featured the webinar today. Next slide, please. So without further ado, I want to hand over to Alan Clark, the owner of CM Group based in Australia. So it's pretty late there. So Alan is ready to take off. So what we are planning to do is to have Alan giving us the presentation. You can enter questions live in the Q&A, and at the end of the presentation we're going to reserve enough time for your questions. So that's it. Without further ado, please, Alan, introduce yourself, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Martin. Let me just share my screen first. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. First of all, thanks, Martin, and thank you to Lee and the IMA for the invitation to give this seminar. It's timely, as most of you I'm sure know, for what's happening in China right now, and you know what's been happening with magnesium supply and magnesium prices. And so in this presentation, I'm going to focus mainly on Chinese primary magnesium production, but also China's energy policy, because you know obviously the two are inextricably linked. And I think understanding what is happening in China from an energy policy rollout perspective helps provide the necessary context to understanding why prices have been doing what they've been doing and why the supply has responded as it has. First of all, just very quickly about CM, I'm sure most of the IMA members know who we are. We're a boutique base metals consultancy. We've been actually operating in the magnesium industry for over 20 years, well, almost 25 years now. We released a series of reports on magnesium, smelter economics, supply, demand, and prices. Also, we do a 10-year outlook for the global magnesium industry, which we'll be releasing in Q2 of this year. And more recently, we now present a monthly snapshot of China's magnesium sector, which gives you all of the necessary information, I guess, that you need on prices, production, costs, trade, outlook. But also we include, because we're talking to China's magnesium producers almost every day, and so we ask them about what they feel about the industry, how they're seeing the sentiment in the industry, and that is part of this this publication, this monthly publication as well. What happened in 2021? I really should have put a question mark after that. It was quite the year, and some things in China that happened that really caught a lot of people by surprise, and ended up with what we saw on magnesium prices. I want to just, before I get to explaining in some detail what happened and why. On the right-hand side there, you can see a map of China. Just for the people who don't understand, the magnesium production base in China, it's very much concentrated in Shanxi province. That's AA Shanxi province that you can see there in central China, and in one particular county within Shanxi province, which is called Fugu County. And Fugu is really the heart. It's like the epicenter of global magnesium production. It produces much more than any other county and any other province in China. What we saw last year was Shanxi province fell victim to the country's double control energy policy. I'm going to talk about that in a bit more detail later on. But effectively, what the double control energy policy meant was that there were restrictions put on production in provinces, that are highly energy intensive, of which Shanxi is one of them, and that included the semi-coking ovens in Shanxi and Fugu areas, and it's the semi-coking ovens that provide the energy to the magnesium producers for the process to take place. And so if the semi-coking ovens were to be closed, that meant that magnesium producers were to be closed as well. And that obviously had quite a significant knock-on effect. So we saw the forced closure of the semi-coking ovens, which meant the closure of magnesium production facilities and the forced closure of some magnesium production facilities on their own as well. And the result of that was, as I'm sure most of you know, that magnesium prices last year in September, October, actually went higher than $10,000 per tonne, which was around about a 400% increase over what the prices were in January of last year. And bear in mind that China produces around 85% of the world's primary magnesium, so that obviously meant that there was going to be quite a significant knock-on effect to the rest of the world. To put that into context, there on the left-hand side, you can see what impact this had on the price for primary magnesium, which you can see is the red line there. But also, for those of you who understand the process that's used in China, the pigeon process requires ferrosilicon. Ferrosilicon is used as the reductant. And so you can see the ferrosilicon price started to move higher as well, which obviously has a knock-on effect, a direct knock-on effect to the magnesium price. So those two moving in tandem. Right now we're still seeing, as you can see just on the chart here, the prices did spike and they came down, but what we've just been seeing over the past month to 6 weeks is the prices are starting to move back higher again. I'll talk about that in a little more detail as well later on. So what we saw in Shanxi province happened across the rest of China as well, but because of this high concentration of magnesium production in Shanxi province, it kind of magnified that effect. Just some context here for magnesium prices. I mean, when you look at this, you can see, that if you go back, look over the past decade or so, magnesium prices have kind of moved in line with their peers. You can see here on the chart, aluminium, copper, nickel, lead, etc. And you can see this huge jump that we've seen in magnesium prices, over the past 6 months or so. So really, it's had much more of a significant impact in magnesium than it has in the other peer metals, if you like. I'll just drill down into some more detail. I will make these slides available, by the way, after the presentation. I want to just now take you back to the beginning of last year, because it was in January 2021 that we really started to see the impact of China's double control energy policy start to have a really serious impact on industry. And as I've just said down here on the left-hand side here, this is into January and February of last year. It was really Inner Mongolia where this started. What we saw in Inner Mongolia was the Inner Mongolian authorities had been exposed, if you like, for missing their energy targets over the last 5 years, of the last 5-year plan. They missed it quite spectacularly, and the impact that had was that it meant that they had to reduce their energy consumption on a provincial basis, and they also had to increase their electricity prices. And what that meant was, given that Inner Mongolia is it's a province where there are a number of aluminium smelters, ferrosilicon producers as well, and some other high energy intensive industries, but it was the aluminium industry that we saw got hit almost immediately. We saw some aluminium smelters were forced to close, and we saw energy prices increase significantly. Now that had an impact on the aluminium price almost immediately. If you think back to the beginning of last year, you just start to see the world aluminium price starting to respond to that. Now, as that double control policy was rolled out across China from province to province, Again, remember, targeting the high energy consuming provinces, that industry after industry was starting to be affected. And by the time we got out into July and August, it became evident that Shaanxi province, was likely to miss its target as well and would be forced to respond. And it did respond, as I said earlier, in terms of shutting down semi-coking ovens and some magnesium production. And then you could see the price spike like it did. Okay. Just some more historical context here. This is, China's position as a producer of primary magnesium has been growing steadily over the past 20 years. As you can see here, from 40% in the year 2000, 64, 79, and we've just been at a steady kind of 80 to 85% over the past couple of years. So, this is not a surprise. This concentration of production of primary magnesium in China using the pigeon process, has been on the rise for all that time. And, over that period, if you think back to the chart that I showed you about the prices and the price comparisons, that over that period, over the past 10 years or more, that magnesium prices have been, quite stable and quite low as a result of the capacity that's in China and its dominance. This chart here, what we're showing you is the subtle shifts, if you like, in magnesium production on a province by province basis in China from 2019 through to 2022. And so in 2019 and 2020, this was a period of time where the magnesium price was quite stable. It was around about 18 to 2,000 US dollars a ton. But it was also a time when magnesium producers in China were under a lot of cost pressure. So they were looking for opportunities to reduce their costs whenever they came up. And so during this period, you can actually see that in some provinces, the capacity and production started to fall, 2019 through to 2021. But in 2022 now, we've started to see that some of the capacity in some of the other provinces in China have started to come back online in response to the higher prices. So not much movement. In fact, you can see here that Shaanxi's just gone backwards ever so slightly, but some of these other provinces have started to re-emerge. So over that past, I guess the past 5 to 7 years, the way that we've seen China's magnesium industry respond to a low price environment, because that's what it's been, okay, up until last year, it's been a low price environment. And so the primary magnesium producers and other, linked industries, if you like, have been working together in a kind of a shared economy in order to minimise their waste and also to minimise their costs. And so primary magnesium production has become much more of an integrated process into a much larger, series of processes that are all linked in some way to energy consumption. So you can see here where primary magnesium is sitting, but it's also linked to calcium carbide production, ferrosilicon production, the tail gases, the dolomite coming in here, bricks, coal tar. All of these industries have been working very, very closely together in China for the purpose of minimizing their costs in a very low price environment. Okay, the chart here in the center shows you, what's been a characteristic of China's primary magnesium industry for quite some time. I've just shown you back to 2015 here. But what this shows is capacity and production from 2015 through to 2021. So in other words, what I'm showing you here is utilization, industry utilization. And you can see here that this is sitting significantly lower than 50% industry utilization, meaning there's been a lot of capacity that's been built in China but not used. Now, as we've come through here to 2019, 2020, and 2021, we've started to see that utilization come up, but still off a low base, it's still quite a low number. And we expect that, that will now start to increase more. I'll talk about that a bit more later on as well. But very low utilization rates. In terms of China's primary magnesium production, you can see this is a monthly chart showing 2021, 2020 and 2021. And you can see that there's not a lot of difference. I mean, you can see production starting to come down here as we're heading into that September-October period of last year, where some of the producers were being forced to shut down. But still, you know, since November, December, if I showed you January, that would be higher again. China is still producing close to, you know, what the average primary magnesium production has been on a monthly basis for the past couple of years. Interestingly, now, if I look at it in terms of exports, you can see this tells a different story. You see that the pink lines here show us the exports in 2020, and you can see clearly see the impact, the COVID impact here through 2020. And then in last year to 2021, again, once the prices started to increase, you can see this drop away, but then you can see a very, very strong rebound in the last few months of last year. Now, the double control policy, this is something that I really, if there's one takeaway, I guess, from my presentation, I really want it to be this. This is to understand what the double control policy is. The double control policy in China is a subset, if you like, of China's dual carbon policy, where the dual carbon policy says China will peak in its carbon emissions by 2030, and it will be carbon neutral by 2060. Now, the double control policy plays into that dual carbon policy. And as it has been rolled out in China, it has been rolled out very, very strictly. Now, the double control policy means that each, on a provincial basis, each one of the provinces needs to control its total annual energy consumption and also its energy consumption intensity. So that's the double part of it. Okay, it's the controlling the consumption, but also the intensity. Now, that's what we've seen have the impact so far. On the right-hand side, you know, for those of you who don't know, China also has an emissions trading scheme. It's been operating as a pilot scheme for probably the past 7 or 8 years now, but last year it went national. Now, not all of the industries in China are included in the ETS yet. You know, an obvious omission so far has been the aluminium sector, but we would expect the aluminium sector to join either later this year or sometime in 2023. And we would also expect the magnesium industry to join the ETS, you know, at a similar sort of time as the aluminium sector. So that's another policy tool. To us, we kind of look at it, this is sort of hand in glove with the double control policy, that these are the two policies that will be used to control you know, China's non-ferrous sector in terms of achieving the dual carbon policy, certainly in the short term. Okay, now on the right-hand side here, you can see a table, this is a table which is now published in China, and it's like the traffic light system of whether a province is achieving its double control targets or not. And you can see this was what was happening coming towards the end of 2020. You can see here clearly that there are 2 provinces, IM is Inner Mongolia and Ningxia down the bottom here, that these 2 provinces came up with 2 red lights. And that's why we saw those 2 provinces, Inner Mongolia in particular, be targeted. And that's where we started to see the impact of the double control policy, you know, quite severely. Just on the left-hand side here, I thought this might be interesting to see from a magnesium perspective. You know, two of you know, magnesium's largest customer bases, market sectors, if you like, is the aluminium sector and the steel sector, and they are number 1 and number 3 in terms of you know, China's carbon emissions. So they're important for the magnesium industry from that perspective. So what does it mean in terms of the cost structure of China's primary magnesium sector? This is quite fascinating, really. If you look on the left-hand side, there's 2 cost curves there. The cost curve in blue is January of 2021, and red is December of 2021. So you can see this cost shift over the course of 11 months or so. This is a jump of around about maybe between 15 and 20% increase, depending on where you are on the curve. But you can see that's quite a significant increase in cost. And that comes about as a result of, higher energy costs, and also higher ferrosilicon costs, which are, if you like, almost a proxy for energy, given the energy intensive nature of producing ferrosilicon. So you can see that the whole cost curve has shifted quite significantly, over the past year or so. Now, on the right-hand side here, this is like a margin curve. So the top one can show that what that shows is that at the beginning of last year, there were, very, very thin margins, which is what we've seen in China's primary magnesium sector for quite some time. But you can see the significant increase in the margins that have prevailed since that spike that we saw in September of last year. Okay, the other interesting observation of what's been happening with respect to primary magnesium production is, of course, the inventories. And you can see we monitor the magnesium inventories at China's magnesium smelters. This is cut by province, so that you can see here the dramatic decrease that there's been in inventories held by the magnesium producers in Shanxi in particular, over the past 18 months or so, as you would expect, particularly once you start to see the capacity, be taken out of the sector, down to the point where at the end of last year we were at critically low levels. We're now starting to see that increase. This is sort of going into the Chinese New Year holiday and into the Winter Olympics. We've just started to see producers start to build some inventory coming out of there, which maybe is a good omen for prices. So into 2022, what does it look like from where we're sitting right now? Well, there's a lot of questions to be answered, particularly with respect to the continuation of the double control policy rollout. Was what we saw in 2021, was it a blip, or are we starting to see something much more structural in its impact on the industry? And what will that mean in terms, in the longer term? If it is structural, what does it mean for the industry and for its cost structure and its margins? And our answer to that question is that we see this very much as not a blip. We are seeing this as a structural shift in China in terms of the cost structure for its magnesium sector. And so we don't see prices returning to where they were anytime soon. We can start to see that impact of the double control policy remain being quite strict through 2022 and beyond, driven by the dual carbon targets, the dual carbon policy. How much capacity will be made redundant as a result of some of the environmental controls that are being put in place as well? Remember, that's the other influence that we're seeing on the industry here. We're seeing the energy policy influence, but before we saw the energy policy influence, we started to see environmental inspections having an impact on the industry as well in terms of their environmental performance. And so now, the mag producers are required to have a lot more emissions control equipment than they've had to have in the past, which is expensive, right? And that pushes their costs up as well. And in our view, we think that, the combination of these two things is likely to take a significant amount of capacity out of the market, and we'll start to see those utilization levels come up to, somewhere close to what we would expect to see, as we see in some of the other industries. The energy control policy in the emissions trading system, when will the mag producers be included? As I said earlier, we think that it's just a matter of time now. That probably next year we'll see the mag producers included, as once we start to see the aluminium sector included as well. Inventories, they're growing, but will we see further disruptions, and which might possibly halt the inventory build? And the feedback that we're getting from the industry right now is that the double control policy still has the potential to have a significant impact on semi-coking ovens through 2022. And if that's the case, then we would expect to see capacity removed for the remainder of 2022, which we think means the prices will stay higher and inventories will struggle to build back to where they were prior to the implementation of the policy. In terms of emergent, restarts, new capacity and so forth, I mean, in terms of QSLM, we're picking up some signals that QSLM, although it's under suspension, we might see a restart sometime soon, which will put more mag into the system. There's also the ongoing RSM project, which is a large new magnesium project, which may start commercial production sometime in the next 18 months or so as well. So there might be some more capacity to come, which we would see more as replacement capacity than additional capacity. And what does it mean for the international supply dynamics? What we're seeing, we're seeing the rest of the world respond to what's been happening in China with several new primary magnesium projects that are being presented around the world, and we're involved in some of those at the moment, looking at their feasibility. And I would expect that we'll see more of them, and which is what you would expect in this kind of environment, particularly if you take the view as we do that this is a structural shift rather than just a blip. Okay, I've got through my slides now. I'm going to leave it there. I'm sure we've got some questions to come through. So I'll hand back to you, Mark, and you can maybe field some of those questions or bring them to my attention.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Really, really good insights. And I think if you explain it, it seems logical that we have to see it coming earlier, but I think most of us were surprised by the intensity of the crisis.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, having said that, I mean, it did take a lot of the Chinese industry itself was taken by surprise, and as has been the Chinese aluminium industry has been taken by surprise as well. So I don't think it's we can kind of look back hindsight and see that some of these things were coming, but I guess it's just that they came so quickly is what took people by surprise.
Yeah. Yeah, I think also what we take away from the presentation as well, that's the overall mechanism to control the capacity is kind of the energy source.
Yes.
And with the ETS also the carbon footprint comes into the equation as well. We don't have or pick up any kind of movement from the Chinese industry to move into a lower carbon footprint production, rather than using different grid, and you have to use electricity. You can't make a coal grid more green. That's it's a little bit difficult. So we have to see how this emerges. You mentioned the Bao Steel project. I think that's at the announced with some of 300,000 tons. So that will certainly shake up the industry if that comes on stream. Yes, I have one question here, and that's about the Qinghai operation. I don't know if you have more insights from that.
Well, look, I'm sure there are some people that are on the call who know a lot more about what's happening in QSLM than I do. But certainly, we've picked up some signals that it's getting closer to coming back on the stream. And I think with what's been happening in China and the very nature of the process kind of works in the favour of bringing QSLM on sooner rather than later.
Yeah. I have another question on which is of course the obvious one. You said that you see the price settlement within the short term in a way to stay at these levels and not going back to the low level like 14, 15 months ago. Yeah. And the question is, can you give any prediction on aluminium and magnesium price?
Very difficult to do. I mean, from our perspective, we're guided by the cost curve. And, as I said, in that cost curve, you can see that there has been, an increase in the cost base so far of, between 15 and 20% on what it was at the beginning of last year. So I think, there's an indication of where we think the costs will go structurally. I think we're sort of 15 to 20%. But I think on top of that also, we're going to see an increase in the capital costs as well for new plants, which will have an impact ultimately on the cost. And so I think, the cumulative impact of those two things, we'll see it move, significantly higher than where it's been, over the past 5 to 7 years. And by significant, I mean, I think it's at least a sort of a 30 to 40% increase.
Yeah. All right. I have here a question on the vertical integration of the Chinese industry, because you showed the slide, and the slide was about the in and outflow of the magnesium primary smelter production. Of course, the worry from the outside Chinese industry networks, and Europe showed that in particular, is that they are worried that when there is a shortage, that Chinese producers would be preferred. However, you showed that the developments on the exports from China, and we saw a pretty high pickup already in November, which was the highest month for 15, 16 months. But do you see that there is kind of a preference, or could be a preference, to national value chain?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it is, to satisfy domestic demand, may be a preference, and that may well happen. But I think, you've also got to bear in mind how much capacity there is that's idle. And also, if you think back to, seeing some of those other provinces starting to emerge and starting to, restart their capacity, and it gives you the impression that should the prices remain high and exports start to, increase again, that there would be sufficient capacity to satisfy the domestic requirement and whatever potential export or increase in exports there might be as a result. So I think, the short answer is there's enough capacity there.
Yeah. I have a question from actually our IMA president, Rick McCurry, and welcome, Rick, to our webinar as well. Rick is asking if there's still a gap between the cost and the price, and the question is, will it have what you mentioned, the dual policy or the environmental policies in China in general, would most probably close this gap, or making it smaller?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the spike, the excursion that we saw in price, in September and October was very much sentiment. I mean, I remember at the time that there were, several reports of, magnesium supply, magnesium being very, very difficult to acquire because there was a shortage. But I can tell you that was not what we were seeing in China. We were seeing a price spike, and then we were seeing buyers hesitant to buy at such high prices. So the magnesium was still available, but the price was too high. And so therefore you saw a drop in the exports, although the material was still available. Now, I think what we're likely to see in future is we might see, more excursions like we saw in September and October, if the policy rollout, results in some capacity closures, and we'll see those price spikes. But I think it comes back to the issue of, whether this is a structural shift and where it lands. And that's very much going to be dependent on where energy prices in China land, and also on a provincial basis, what pressure these provinces come under in order to achieve their double control policy targets. Because if they miss them, then we will see the same thing happen again. We'll see the semi-coking ovens being forced to close. We'll see magnesium producers being forced to close. Even if it's just temporarily, they will be forced to close in order for that province to meet that target. So, in other words, I think we're going to see some volatility still over at least the next year or so. but coming back to the cost base has shifted higher, and we'll see that, I think, over the longer term. We'll see the price reflect that.
Yeah, and I think we have to remember that the magnesium industry is not acting alone, or will never be like a sole target of a provincial or of a state policy. And I think you said the day before in another webinar, you said that maybe there are some policies for non-ferrous metals as a group, because magnesium is one of this. However, a small part, because aluminium, as we know, is quite bigger.
That's right. That's right.
We have a couple of questions. Of course, we talk about China here, and you said that you see the big projects rather kind of a replacement capacity rather than let's say a significant step up within the short term. Of course, a couple of questions here coming in that people are asking about what are the alternative sources, how they are doing currently. And as you mentioned already, there are a couple of new initiatives. You know, we see in Australia a couple of new projects in the pipeline, also in Europe with the firstly mentioned European Commission initiatives. That there are a few attempts here. But I think those projects will not come on stream within the next 2.5 years at the earliest. So we have to deal with the current. Maybe you can run through the situation on the non-Chinese production capacities, and also a question about the Russians one, very recent because of the Ukraine situation. If they will we see any impact immediately?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I said, in terms of world production, China's between 80 and 85%, so that only leaves 15. And of that 15%, I think if you looked around the world right now, I'll put the two Russian plants aside for now, but if you looked at all of the other rest of world producers, they're running pretty much as hard as they can right now. And so is there the potential for rest of world producers to pick up some of that slack should there be the need to do so? The answer is no. The capacity is just not there. There are two plants in Russia, and we'll wait to see what happens. Russia is a net exporter of primary magnesium, and so there may be that may mean that there is more of a deficit if there's some restrictions put on magnesium exports from Russia as well. So in the short term, there's very little that can be done about it. I think, Martin, as you said, when you look at what's happening around the world now, and we are starting to see new magnesium projects start to pop up. There's 3 of them here in Australia, Europe, North America, and some other places as well. But realistically, you say 2 to 2.5 years, and which I think in some countries is potentially doable, but I would think only on a smaller scale. So if it's a pigeon type operation in Turkey where it might be 15 to 20,000 tons, that might be okay. But anything more than that, 40, 50,000 tons, my personal view is that's probably, 2, 3, that's probably 3 to 5 years away, realistically, in whether it's in Europe or here in Australia or anywhere else for that.
Yes, certainly. I think the lead time to a significant capacity shift is far away than 2.
I think the other thing you've got to take into consideration here, Martin, is that no matter what the technology is that's going to be used to produce magnesium somewhere else, it needs energy. And the form of that energy and the price of that energy and the carbon footprint of that energy all play into the approvals now and the viability of those sorts of projects. So it's a lot more complex to have those types of projects approved than it was 4 or 5 years ago. So that, I think, what that means is a possible extension again to the timeframes for approvals and for construction.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there will be a fight for green energy. I mean, all the industries heavy energy consuming industries want to have or claim a share on their energy supply, green energy supplies. Otherwise, they can't fulfill their CO2 reduction targets. And as magnesium will not likely be another process, it will always be a heavy energy intensive process. We have a question here on somehow what is the situation on import taxes into Europe. I mean, we have currently, and maybe if I'm wrong, we have currently a 4% on alloys into Europe, and a 5.4% import tariff on pure. However, on pure we have a kind of a free tariff quota into the EU 27 of 120,000 tons. I think it was suspended last year, but it's still on in 2022. So this is the, and we have a quota on a certain type of magnesium powder, a quota of 2,000 tons into Europe. I think this is the current, let's say, import system we have. We have a question from Graham from Laxford here on sort of the all new capacity which come on stream, or surplus capacity. I don't know if you mean China or globally, and about the energy policies in place. I think we have talked about this, that there will be a race on energy. In China, anything particular on energy? But you said that already, but is there something particular that, for instance, the Chinese industry is shifting from one process to another, or will we see more salt lakes instead of improved pitching process and so on?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Graham, by the way. I think what we're seeing is, because there's so much latent pigeon capacity in China already, but the other important thing to keep in mind here is that, the capital cost of pigeon process is low. So it's higher operating costs, but low capital costs. And so, plants can be built quickly. And, despite the fact that they're a higher operating cost. And so those plants, if there's new capacity required, or even some of that surplus capacity, which is idle right now, it doesn't take much for it to come back. And I think if you think back to the slide I showed on the provincial basis of what had happened most recently, that we saw in Mongolia pop up again as a primary magnesium producer, which we haven't seen for quite some time. And so I think that's an indication that once the price moves like it has quite quickly, that some of the capacity, depending where it's sitting and what the situation is with their double control policies, that it can actually come back quickly to respond to those higher prices.
Yes, we have another question here on, we talk about prices, we talk about capacity. The question is here related to the applications and to the markets. Do we see kind of an impact on the outlook on the demand because of the availability and the price?
What a very good question. I mean, I think
that's the multi-million.
I'll answer the easy bit first, and then maybe the harder part we can discuss. But look, I mean, when it comes to the largest market for primary magnesium is still aluminium alloy, has been for a long time, and it still is today. And there's no substitute for magnesium to aluminium to make the particular alloys that are used in, whether it's cans or road wheels or whatever it is, it requires magnesium. There is no substitute. And so, our outlook for aluminium, the aluminium sector is quite strong. And so therefore, the outlook for magnesium into the aluminium sector is quite strong as well, in our view. The second largest market, of course, for mag is the die casting sector. Now, this is the really tricky one because, to die cast magnesium. For a lot of the applications that you can die cast magnesium, you can also use die cast aluminium. And so if the price was to increase significantly over the price of aluminium, and the industry always makes reference to the ratio of the densities of the two metals, that once the price ratio exceeds the density ratio, then one becomes more attractive than the other. In reality, it doesn't quite happen that way. But if the magnesium price was to sit significantly higher than the aluminium price, then I think you could actually mount the argument that some applications for magnesium might come into question, because if aluminium's significantly cheaper, then then there's the potential for it to switch. Having said that, if we found, for example, in a few years' time that there was enough primary magnesium production outside of China, and there was therefore perceived as being a lower supply risk and at a competitive cost, then the more magnesium production facilities that there are outside of China, the more attractive that might be to the die casting sector. And so we might start to see an increase in magnesium consumption in that sector. So that's it's a tricky one to answer that.
So we have quite some frequency in the chat. So there's a lot of business going on in the chat. So.
And Martin, I mean, I was going to say that you might be able to answer that question on the die casting better than I can.
I don't know about that. Yeah, I mean, we are discussing that in the European Committee and in some subgroups on sustainability quite intensively, and see that we really are at a step change. So we need a metal which is reliable to get on a long term, and also to provide a low carbon footprint.
Yes.
I think this is it's maybe it's a little bit overshadowed by the current crisis, I think, but it will bounce back very quickly because our members who are producing magnesium parts or are involved in that, saying that, well, the OEMs, they are putting out their scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon emission targets and positions. And if you want to supply, you have to sign up with them. And we showed in one automotive dialogue, we showed, for instance, an LCA breakdown in a report from a recent Polestar 2 compared to a Volvo X40, where you have all the different materials named in a kind of a material list shown with their carbon footprint. And of course, if you have the information on magnesium, what we have, let's say, without any credits and the average world, including China, of course, with about 28 kilogram equivalent, then you stand out as a strategic material. And I think that we have to tackle. And we have worked very hard on updating the databases, because all these people take the information from such engineering databases, and we have to try to bring in lower magnesium categories in those databases as well. So we see, and we have not managed really to get more mileage out of the new powertrains in cars. So we see more car parts to switch over to new powertrain cars, so electric and hybrid cars, but they are in principle the same parts as we had before. So that will be very, very interesting. And it's, of course, it's interesting how China will influence that. Will they equip their electrical vehicles with more magnesium parts or not? So I think that's also because more cars coming into Europe and US from China and built now in China, which you probably even would not know that they are coming actually from China. Okay, I look into, don't have any questions. We have a lot of announcements in the chat, but not. Yeah, we have a question on the Russian Ukraine again. What the impact on the market is? I think you have said that already.
Yeah. I think it's just important to remember that you know that Russia is a net exporter of magnesium. Keep that in mind.
Yeah, and most of the quantities are used for the titanium production.
It's used in titanium production as well. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so looking at the time, so we have.
There are a couple of questions that come through about magnesium recycle as well.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
And although it's sort of outside the scope of this presentation, but a very, very important point. I mean, you know, as is pointed out in the chat there, that you know, the lowest CO2 carbon footprint magnesium is recycled magnesium, and you know, everything that can be done to increase magnesium recycle rates will be done, in my view, where it's just a question of time.
Yeah, I think that's also from what we had initiated a recycling study for the recycling flows in Europe, which is available on the IMA website, and of course it shows that the recycling of process recycling is running very well, of course, but we are not getting anything back from pure magnesium, which goes into the aluminium cycle. So this is in fact lost for the magnesium industry, and we're pushing towards that as well. But I think we have to still educate people that you can't recycle or use only recycled magnesium, like the aluminium industry is trying to paint the picture that you know, you have secondary alloys which are containing minimum of 80% of scrap, and you have specifications for computer housings in Asia where they claim they have 100% magnesium secondary use for their alloys, which is doubtful, but it's out there. So there are a lot of different ways to market that. Okay, looking at the time, and I guess it's 3 o'clock in the morning for you, Alan, or 2 o'clock.
It's getting on for that. Yes.
So okay, I think you can all join me in thanking Alan here for that he stood there, that he survived during this late night presentation. It was very good. I think also a very intensive discussion here, and I think you have Alan's email displayed and the IMA email displayed as well, so please reach out to us. Just the presentation will be available to the participants. Also, the IMA has recorded the webinar, and this will be also available on the IMA website as well. And I think we had around 114, I saw 114 participants at the peak. So this shows that the topic was very interesting and a great success for us as well. And also thanks again for the IMA staff who arranged that, and also CRM Alliance and Aluminium International for also promoting the seminar. So with that, I say goodbye, and also in the name of IMA, and Alan, again, a great presentation, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. We really appreciated your thoughtful presentation. It was excellent. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.